Hey YouTube, it's the Army Wife here. Just doing a little video. Some people have asked me how I got into prepping. So I'm just going to do a video to answer the question because we're all curious. And our stories are all interesting. I love to hear other people's stories about what started them getting into prepping. Back in 1997, my mother-in-law was preparing for Y2K, and she bought the 5-gallon buckets and the Mylar and the oxygen absorbers, and she started packing wheat and rice and beans and flour and sugar, drink mixes, into buckets. And she, a lot of the family thought she was kind of a little gone off her rocker, but you know, it made her happy, so nobody really was very critical about it. Some of them just kind of snickered, and I have a lot of respect for my mother-in-law, and she's a really, really good teacher, and I listen to what she says, because she has a lot of knowledge, especially when it comes to things like living frugal, living simple, doing things yourself, being healthy. I learned a lot about organics, and why organics are so important. I learned all those things from her, and I will always be grateful to her for all the things that she's taught me. I'm very fortunate to have a mother-in-law that I do. We all joke about our mother-in-laws, but I'm very blessed. She's a Christian woman, and she's loves her kids, and she loves her kids as spouses just like they were her own, and she's always made me feel like I was her kid. So I'm just grateful to her for that. But anyway, so she started packing buckets, Mylar bags and buckets, and she was doing 5 gallons of wheat, 5 gallons of beans, 5 gallons of rice, and then she was doing buckets with a small gallon bag of beans, a gallon bag of rice, a gallon bag of sugar, a gallon bag of just regular white flour, some Kool-Aid mixes, different baking things that you might need, yeast packets, different things like that. So essentially what she was doing was she was breaking up short long-term food storage and long-term food storage, if that makes sense. And she put instructions in the buckets on what needed to be done. And there was powdered milk in there. I mean, there was everything in these buckets that you would need to survive, except for water. And water hasn't really been much of an issue for us. My father-in-law is a well driller. My husband knows pumps and wells and things like that also, just from how he grew up. So I have no doubt that my husband can find water. And not only that, but him being in the military, my husband knows how to make water from condensation. He knows some pretty serious survival techniques for getting hydration. So anyway, water was never really a big issue. I mean, she stored water, but it wasn't the main thing. It was the food. And she did it for all of us, all of her kids, all of her grandkids. I believe she even did it for her siblings also. And she had her Y2K room, and it's still lovingly called her Y2K room, and it was packed from floor to ceiling with white 5-gallon buckets. And then each one of us kids had, I don't even remember how many 5-gallon buckets she gave to each one of us for the families. I don't remember if it was 32 buckets or 16 buckets. Whatever it was enough to get us through for 3 months or so until we could get to our agreed meetup location, which was with them. And, you know, I hung on every word that she said. Wasn't really sure that Y2K was going to happen, but it sounded feasible and it seemed wise to prepare. I don't think anybody else really took her very seriously. Mike and I did. But anyway, she did all this food. Well, Y2K came and went and nothing happened. Well, 2001 came and the towers fell. The worst terrorist attack against this country. And my husband and I, at that time, I was no longer in the military, and my husband was, he had left the police force, and we had started a construction company. And it was a pretty new construction company. We'd only been in business, I think, 1.5 years when the 9/11 happened. And we had a really good business. We had a very good niche where we were. But the problem was that after the towers fell and the markets kept bouncing up and down, the people that we catered to were mostly retired people. And where we lived was a very large snowbird population. And snowbird, if you don't know what that is, that's people who travel in their RVs, and they have, you know, like a summer home and a winter home, and they just follow the best weather. And so, you know, we didn't build houses. I mean, we did do like manufactured homes and stuff, but we didn't build actual houses. We did things like garages and shops and RV covers and decks and sheds and water treatment, things like that. Well, when the markets, you know, started bouncing around, this is where these people's retirements were held, and they weren't spending any money. They weren't buying things that weren't absolutely necessary, and the things that our business offered wasn't considered an absolute necessity. So, make a long story short, we made it until December of 2002, just barely making it by, and that fall there had been another bad dip in the stock market, and all of our winter contracts had been canceled. People got scared, and where we lived, if you did not have your winter contracts set before October 1st, chances are you weren't going to work during the winter, because it was a very heavy snow area where we were at. So very high elevation. And anyway, so we paid our employees through Christmas. We didn't have a Christmas that year. Our parents, thank God, took care of our kids, but there was no Christmas at our house that year. And we ate out of those 5-gallon buckets. And those 5-gallon buckets saved us. We ate rice and beans, and I learned how to make, I could make a pot of beans on Monday, and a really big pot of beans on Monday, and I could figure out a way to make 5 completely different meals out of those beans so that it didn't seem like we were having beans every day. Took some practice, but I figured it out. And you know, when you have little kids, that's even harder, and I really encourage you to keep that in mind. A child will starve themselves. If people say, oh, well, if you're hungry, you'll eat anything. No, that's not true. That is not true. There's called appetite fatigue, and people subconsciously will starve themselves. you hear about soldiers and stuff living on, you know, bugs and, you know, things like that. Well, they're highly trained to do that. And when they're trained it's a psychological training. And if you don't have that psychological training for survival, and it's not something you can really do to yourself, and especially you can't do it to your kids. So I encourage you to find ways to store food and come up with menus and recipes that your kids will enjoy. So that's super important. And then, so anyway, so we lived off those 5-gallon buckets. And in January of 2003, my husband fought back the only way that he could, and he joined the Army at 30 years old. And they called him Grandpa. He wasn't the oldest guy to go through boot camp, but he was no spring chicken. And anyway, I started my second military life. And I'm very proud of him for what he did for us, what he's done for this country and what he's done for his family. And that's why I'm a prepper, because that little bit of preparation that my mother-in-law did, and it wasn't a little bit, she worked really, really hard, but had we helped her, it wouldn't have been so hard on her, it wouldn't have been so much. But that setting, and it wasn't expensive. It's more expensive now than it was back then to buy beans and rice and things like that. Wheat. It's a lot more expensive, especially on the West Coast. For some reason, that stuff is so much cheaper than it is here. But anyway, that little bit that she spent on that made the world of difference for us, and I'll be forever grateful to her for that. And that's my story as why I'm a prepper. And I really kicked it. I slacked off on my food stores for quite a while, and I was never the 5-gallon bucket type preparer, but I always had a big pantry. And as our economy has started to deteriorate, and I see signs given to us kind of by the military, and I'm going to go into that in my next video. I really got in gear with the storing of the rice and the wheat and the beans, and getting in high gear in that, and then building up the rest of my pantry. So anyway, that is how I became a prepper. So feel free if you have any questions about meals and things like that, and things you can do with beans, and how you can take 1 pot of beans and make 5 meals out of it that don't seem like you're eating beans every day. I'd be happy to share that. Matter of fact, I might do a video on that, so I'll do a video on that. So anyway, this is the Army Wife signing out.